Every Halloween, the old Carter house glows with flickering pumpkins and laughter. But this year, something different rises beneath the laughter. When a young boy follows the sound of distant whispers into the backyard, his flashlight lands on a forgotten grave hidden under the dying oak tree. The soil moves slowly, like something buried long ago is trying to breathe again. For decades, the Carter family buried their secret under silence, pretending it never happened. But the grave remembers, and tonight, it's done waiting. As the wind turns colder and the shadows stretch longer, one truth claws its way to the surface. Some family secrets don't die. They wait to be found. The air around the Carter estate carried a strange heaviness that October, like even the wind was afraid to loudly. Autumn leaves gathered at the foot of the porch, their edges brittle and blackened, as if burned by something unseen. Beyond the iron gate, the house stood tall and wary, a relic of old Southern pride. Its walls still clinging to secrets that refused to fade with time. Inside, Margaret Carter sat by the window, her trembling hands wrapped around a cup of tea gone cold. She was 84 now, her bones thin, her eyes dim, but her memory, sharp as ever, refused to grant her peace. Every Halloween, she swore she could hear the same soft hum, the faint rhythmic pulse of the earth shifting somewhere behind the house. Most nights, she told herself it was just the wind. But she knew better. The Carter family had always hosted the grandest Halloween gatherings in their small Louisiana town. The neighbors came for pumpkin pie, stories, and laughter, never knowing the soil they stood upon wasn't as innocent as the lanterns glowing above it. This year's celebration would be no different on the surface, but inside, something in Margaret's spirit twisted with dread. It had been 72 years since that night. 72 years since the Carters buried what they shouldn't have. Margaret's late husband, Thomas, had called it a mercy. But she called it what it truly was, a curse. She still remembered the night vividly. A storm rolling in, lightning splintering the sky, and a scream that cut through the rain like a knife. What they buried afterward was not just flesh and bone, it was truth itself. Now, as her children and grandchildren prepared the decorations, outside hanging fake cobwebs, carving smiling pumpkins, Margaret felt each laugh echo like a taunt from the grave. The younger ones knew nothing, of course. To them, Halloween was harmless fun, but every plastic skeleton that clattered in the wind felt like mockery in the reflection of the window. She could almost see the faint outline of a figure standing by the old oak tree watching. Waiting. Margaret blinked. The figure was gone. But the unease stayed. Downstairs, the smell of cinnamon and burning candles filled the air. Laughter from her granddaughter drifted up the staircase. Margaret pressed a hand against her chest, trying to slow her heartbeat. She'd kept this secret her entire life, long enough for people to forget. But the grave had its own memory, and this year the earth felt restless. That night, when the guests arrived and music began to fill the house, Margaret excused herself and stepped outside. The full moon bathed the yard in pale light, and the old oak tree at its roots, gnarled and greedy, stood where it always had, marking the edge of the property. The grass beneath it refused to grow. She could still trace the her sons to build a shed or plant flowers in that patch of earth, because that ground wasn't empty. It was watching her. The night deepened, and distant thunder began to murmur in the sky. A low wind howled through the branches, making the lanterns sway like dying souls. Margaret's breath came shallow as she felt the air change colder, heavier. Then she heard it again. That faint hum. Low, steady, vibrating through the soles of her shoes. It was coming from beneath the tree. Her knees nearly gave way as a memory crashed over her, the sight of a girl's face. Pale and still, her eyes open wide in betrayal. Margaret's fingers dug into her shawl. The name formed in her throat but never escaped. She turned back toward the house. Through the kitchen window, she could see her daughter laughing, stirring a pot of soup. The children danced in costume, carefree, safe in their ignorance. For a moment, Margaret envied them. They didn't know what it meant to carry guilt that breathes beneath your feet, but she also knew something they didn't this Halloween. The ground would not stay silent. As she turned to head inside, a soft giggle broke the air behind her. Not a child's, not quite human either. The sound was faint but close to close. She froze. Just the wind, she whispered. But the wind didn't giggle. The motion sensor light flicked on suddenly, bathing the oak tree in harsh white. The shadows seemed to scatter for a heartbeat, and in that flicker, she thought she saw a small hand press up through the dirt before disappearing again. Margaret stumbled back, clutching her chest. Her breathing turned ragged, her vision swimming, and yet, through her panic, she couldn't shake the feeling that what she'd just seen wasn't a hallucination. It was an invitation from the past. The hum beneath the earth grew louder, pulsing like a heartbeat. She could almost feel it sinking with her own. She backed away, trembling, and whispered a prayer she'd long forgotten. By morning, she told herself she'd call a priest. By morning, she would tell some unknown one. But as she turned back to the window, she caught sight of her reflection, and something inside her froze. Behind her own reflection stood another face, faint, gray, and smiling. The teacup shattered in her hand. Margaret stumbled backward, gasping for breath, but when she turned around, there was no one there. Just the empty night, the oak tree, and the restless soil, whispering softly. Her family came running when they heard the crash, but Margaret forced a weak smile and waved them off. "Just clumsy," she said. "Go on, enjoy yourselves." They believed her. They always did. But when they returned to their laughter and flickering lights, Margaret remained by the window, her gaze locked on that patch of cursed ground. Something was coming. She could feel it in her bones, in the pulse of the house, in the way the shadows seemed to gather, just a little closer every night. This Halloween would be their last one, untouched by truth. Because the grave had begun to remember. And when it remembers, it doesn't whisper, it screams. What the Carter family buried 70 years ago is waking up, and it's coming for the one who kept it hidden. The days following Halloween night carried a strange stillness over the Carter estate. The laughter that once filled the rooms had faded, leaving behind an air too thick to breathe. Even the house house seemed to groan differently, bones creaking like whispers trapped within the walls. Margaret hadn't slept. The image of that gray, smiling face haunted every corner of her mind. Each night, she sat in her chair facing the window, watching the oak tree as if daring it to move again. The ground beneath it was no longer still. It pulsed in the moonlight like something alive, something feeding. The younger ones noticed changes first. The children whispered of footsteps in the attic when everyone was asleep. The family cat refused to go near the backyard, arching its back whenever the wind shifted that way. In the kitchen, candles burned lower than they should have, their flames bending as though drawn toward the old oak outside. Margaret tried to convince herself it was nothing, just the imagination of youth and the tricks of age. But every time she blinked, she could see the faint shimmer of movement beneath the soil. Like breath, then came the rot. It started subtly, a damp smell rising through the floorboards. The scent of earth and something older, like decay. The family blamed plumbing, but when they lifted the tiles, the soil underneath was black and wet, pulsing faintly as if it were alive. Margaret knew that smell. She had smelled it 70 years ago, the night the secret was buried. She had stood in that same soil with blood on her hands and her heart full of silence. Her father had told her that silence was safety, that no one needed to know what had been done, that the Carter name must stay clean. But guilt, like rot, doesn't stay buried forever. That evening, rain began to fall. The storm rolled over the house like a dark ocean, thunder cracking the sky open in flashes of white. Margaret sat alone in her room, her fingers trembling over a box she had hidden under the floorboards decades ago. She pulled it out slowly. Inside lay a faded photograph, a girl in a white dress, smiling, her skin luminous even in sepia. Her name was Clara. Margaret had been 16 when Clara came to work for the Carters. She was kind, with laughter that brightened even the darkest corners of the house. But Clara's beauty had caught the wrong kind of attention from someone powerful, someone whose sins could never be spoken aloud. And when Clara vanished, the Carters whispered it was an accident, but Margaret knew. She had seen what happened. She had helped cover it up. Lightning tore across the sky, throwing her reflection against the window. For an instant, she swore she saw Clara's face, instead pale, waterlogged eyes hollow with sorrow. The teacup in Margaret's hand slipped, shattering against the floor. The sound echoed like bones breaking. Downstairs, her grandson Eli shouted that the lights were flickering. The house plunged into darkness. In the same breath, a deep tremor ran through the floor, soft at first, then stronger, rattling the glass frames on the walls. The family screamed as the air filled with a low, rumbling hum, the same heartbeat Margaret had felt beneath the oak tree, but this time it was coming from inside the house. Furniture rattled. The chandelier swayed violently, and a chill swept through every room. Eli called out for his grandmother, but Margaret didn't move. She sat still, her gaze fixed on the ceiling as dust fell from the rafters. Her lips trembled as she whispered a prayer she hadn't spoken since childhood. The storm outside roared louder, and then silence. For one dreadful second, everything stilled. And then the smell hit. Wet soil, iron decay. The The walls began to bleed. Thin, dark streaks seeping through the wallpaper, running in crooked lines down to the floorboards. The family backed away in terror, clutching one another, their eyes darting to the ceiling as if the house itself were weeping. Margaret rose slowly, her frail body trembling, but her eyes, though sunken, haunted eyes, were sharp with recognition. She knew what this was. The land had awoken. She stepped outside into the storm, her nightgown clinging to her skin. The rain felt heavy, thick like the weight of judgment. Each drop struck the ground with a hiss, as though the soil itself burned at the touch of truth. Lightning flashed, and in that blinding moment, she saw it. The grave had opened. The dirt was split wide, forming a gaping wound in the earth. The roots of the oak writhed like living veins, reaching up through the air, dripping with black mud. And there, half buried in the churned soil, lay bones twisted, white, and shining beneath the storm. Margaret fell to her knees, her scream lost to the thunder. Her family rushed outside after her, confusion and fear painted across their faces. They didn't understand. They couldn't. The ground shuddered again, and from within the grave came a faint glow, blue-white, ethereal, pulsing in rhythm with the heartbeat of the storm. A hand-small, delicate skeletal rose from the earth, and then, for the first time in 70 years, Clara's voice filled the night. Not in words, but in sound, an anguished wail that pierced through wind and rain. A sound that wasn't made for mortal ears. Margaret collapsed, clutching her chest, her mind flooding with images of the night she tried to forget, the screams, the pleading eyes, the shovel striking the ground, and her own hands pushing dirt over a life that had never deserved to end. The family watched in horror as the oak tree split at its base, the wood cracking open like a ribcage. From its hollow, a figure began to emerge, shrouded in dripping roots and mud, her hair tangled with soil, her eyes glowing faintly in the dark. The children screamed. The adults froze. But Margaret, she only wept because she knew Clara wasn't there to hurt them. Clara was there to make her remember. The earth trembled again, stronger now. The lanterns in the yard exploded, sending shards of glass through the air. The sky above the Carter house turned a deep, unnatural shade black mixed with violet, as if the heavens themselves were bruised. Margaret's mind spiraled as she realized what was happening. The land and the spirit had merged. Clara's rage had seeped into the soil, her pain anchoring itself into every root, every blade of grass. The Carters hadn't just buried her body. They had poisoned the land with their silence. Now the land wanted balance. Lightning illuminated Clara's face, half decayed, half beautiful, eyes flickering between grief and fury. She raised her head, and the rain around her turned to ash. Margaret whispered, "I'm sorry," though the words never reached her lips. Her body trembled violently, and she fell forward onto the wet earth, her hand brushing against Clara's bones, and in that instant, she felt everything, every cry Clara had swallowed, every pain, every betrayal. The guilt consumed her, and the soil swallowed her hand like it was claiming what was owed. Her family screamed for her, but the ground didn't let go. It pulled harder. The mud thickened, dragging her inch by inch toward the grave as her body sank deeper. The wind howled her name, twisting it into something monstrous. The sky, saw before darkness claimed her was Clara's face come. Now, almost peaceful as if justice had finally been found, then silence. The storm stopped. The grave closed. The next morning, the Carter family awoke to find the oak tree blackened at its roots and Margaret gone without a trace. Only her shawl remained, half buried in the soil where the grave had been. But the land was quiet now. Too quiet, and far beneath the roots, something pulsed, faintly slow, steady, patient, as though the curse wasn't broken. Only past on morning light should have felt safe. But after that night, nothing about the Carter house felt like it belonged to daylight anymore. The air inside was still and heavy, carrying the faint scent of soil. The oak tree outside stood black and twisted, its roots breaking through the earth like ribs pushing through decayed flesh. Margaret was gone. No footprints, no struggle, no body. Only her shawl, soaked and half buried, lay at the foot of the tree. Her family clung to denial. They told the police she'd wandered into the storm. They told the neighbors she was old, confused, frail. But inside those walls, every member of the Carter bloodline felt the same silent terror. Margaret hadn't vanished. She had been taken back by evening. The house had changed. The air felt electric, humming like a storm that never left. Pictures on the walls began to tilt on their own. The candles flickered in unison, their flames bending toward the back window, the one overlooking the oak. That's where Eli stood, frozen, watching the ground move. At first, he thought it was an illusion, trick of tired eyes. But then he saw the soil truly shift, breathing, expanding and contracting like lungs beneath the earth. Something was alive down there, something aware. The rest of the family avoided the window. They avoided speaking of the grave, of Margaret, of Clara, but silence had already been their curse once. Now it became their undoing. As night fell again, a strange fog rolled over the property, thick, silver gray, clinging to every branch and window pane. The moon vanished behind it. Inside the house, the lights dimmed one by one, until the only illumination came from the fireplace. Then the whispers began, soft at first, like breath on glass. But soon, louder layered voices, impossible to understand, echoing through the hallways. The family gathered in the living room, trembling, their eyes darting toward every shadow. The whispers circled them, relentless, growing sharper with each passing second, and then screams, from upstairs, from nowhere, from beneath the floor. A deep, resonant sound, like something clawing its way up through the foundation. Eli's heart thundered in his chest as he backed away, but the wooden floor beneath him bulged, lifting, cracking, splintering in long, jagged lines. The house shuddered. The walls moaned. From the cracks spilled dark mud, glistening with a faint, otherworldly light. It snaked across the floorboards, weaving patterns like veins. Pulsing toward the center of the room, the family screamed and stumbled back as the mud began to rise, shaping itself into something humans, something remembered, a faint outline. A woman's form. Clara Dot, her face half-formed, her hair dripping like wet vines, her eyes wide and hollow but not cruel. They glowed sorrow, not rage. Yet the energy radiating from her made the air vibrate. The room stank of rain and rot. She lifted her gaze, scanning each face as if searching for someone. Her lips didn't move, but her voice filled the room, nonetheless, a sound that wasn't sound, vibrating in the mind rather than the ear. The ground outside began to tremble again. Windows shattered inward, spraying glass like ice. The fog thickened, pouring into the room until the Carters could barely see each other. Then the house went silent. Everything dashed sound, movement, breath froze. Only the ticking of an old clock remained. Tick, 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 and stopped, and then the walls began to bleed. Dark streaks ran down from the ceiling, tracing the outline of hands pressing from the other side. The wallpaper bubbled, blistered, peeled. The air filled with the hum of thousands of trapped voices crying in unison. Eli clutched his chest, feeling a cold pulse beneath his skin. He looked down. Mud was seeping through the cracks between his toes. It climbed up his legs, wrapping around him like a living rope. He tried to scream, but the sound caught in his throat. The mud tightened, dragging him toward the center of the room, toward Clara's glowing figure. The others tried to pull him back, but every time they touched him, they felt the same jolt of cold surge through their bodies. The house seemed to breathe in, drawing them all closer, and then the voices spoke in unison, hundreds layered together. Old and young, whispering the same words over and over, filling every corner of the house. Truth must breathe. The chandelier crashed to the floor, scattering fire and glass. The walls pulsed outward, groaning under unseen weight. The oak tree outside split again, lightning bursting through it, even though the sky was clear. Clara's figure began to flicker, her features dissolving into streaks of light and shadow. Her voice rose into a wail that shook the foundation. Every object in the house, mirrors, clocks, photographs, exploded simultaneously, filling the air with shards and echoes. Then, as quickly as it began, the chaos stopped, the fog cleared, the house fell still. The air went cold. Eli stood in the center of the living room, covered in mud, but untouched. His eyes were open wide, but something inside them had changed. He turned slowly toward the family, his movements unnatural, his expression blank. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Eli smiled, not his smile, hers. The lights flickered once more. The fireplace hissed and died, and from Eli's mouth came the faint hum of the earth. The rest of the family backed away in terror as the sound grew louder, shaking the floor again. Eli's head tilted slowly toward the oak tree visible through the window. His voice, layered and hollow, filled the room. Truth must breathe. The ground outside rippled. The grave opened again, wider this time, swallowing the roots of the oak hole. The earth convulsed, tearing through the yard like a wound that refused to close. The family ran for the door, but when they stepped outside, the world looked wrong. The fog was thicker than ever, curling and twisting into shapes, faces, hands, eyes. The entire land pulsed like it was alive. The air smelled of wet iron and old grief, and from deep beneath the soil came the faintest sound, a heartbeat. Slow, an eternal dot. Eli turned back toward the house. His eyes were no longer his own. The faint blue glow that had once belonged to Clara now burned in his pupils. He looked at his reflection in the glass and smiled again, soft, mournful, knowing inside the house every clock began to tick once more. Perfectly synchronized. Tick, tick. The sound filled the night, echoing through every room, every crack in the floor, every inch of cursed ground, and beneath it, faint but clear, came Margaret's voice, soft, trembling, fading into the hum. Some graves should never be found. Then silence. When the sun rose, the Carter house looked peaceful again. The fog was gone, the air still. But the oak tree's roots now ran deeper than ever, stretching toward the foundations of the house, wrapping around them like claws. Eli sat on the porch, still and smiling, watching the horizon as though waiting for something only he could hear. And far beneath the ground, where the soil was black and the air was ancient, something moved it slowly, patiently, breathing in rhythm with his heart. They thought the curse ended with Margaret, but curses don't die with blood. They live where the truth was buried. The morning came softly, as if the night before had been nothing more than a fevered dream. The Carter house stood drenched in sunlight, pale and hollow, every window open, every door slightly ajar, as though it had exhaled something terrible overnight. Eli was the first to rise. His small feet padded across the floorboards, and for a brief, fragile moment, everything felt normal. The kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon from the candle that had burned too long. The radio hummed static. A forgotten cup of coffee sat cold on the table, but the silence was wrong. It wasn't empty. It was listening. He stood there for a while, staring out the window at the field where the mist was thinning. The grass shimmered faintly with dew, but at the far end, where the family once laid the forgotten grave to rest, the earth looked darker, damp, uneasy, blinked. For just a second, the ground seemed to move, a small, almost imperceptible shudder, then stilled again. By mid-morning, the rest of the family had gathered, each one moving carefully, like walking through a dream they were afraid to wake from. No one mentioned Margaret. No one dared say her name. The photographs on the mantel, once proud and smiling, now seemed crooked, off balance. In one frame, the glass was cracked, splitting Margaret's face perfectly down the center. Eli's mother tried to busy herself, cleaning the counters, humming off-key. She told herself the flickering lights were just bad wiring, that the cold in the hallway was just an autumn draft, that the whispers were just her imagination. But when she reached for a dish, she paused. The radio had shifted frequencies again. From the static, a woman's voice hummed faintly, a lullaby Margaret used to sing when Eli was small. Outside, the land had turned strangely still. Birds perched on the fence posts, but didn't sing. The trees stood bare, even though the season wasn't quite ready to take them. Eli wandered outside, drawn by something he couldn't name. His small hand brushed the dry grass, and as he walked closer to the edge of the field, the air changed colder, heavier. He stopped where the forgotten grave lay. It no longer looked like a mound. It looked like the earth had begun to breathe. There were faint impressions, like something had pressed against the soil from beneath. And in the morning light, the dirt seemed fresh, unsettled. He crouched down was warm. He smiled faintly, whispering, "I know you're still here." Back in the house, a faint tremor rattled the windows. Dishes clinked. A low hum ran through the floorboards, the same way a throat hums before it speaks. Eli's mother turned toward the window, her breath caught. For the briefest moment, she saw movement beyond the field, a silhouette in white. Long hair swaying with the wind, head bowed as if in mourning. But when she blinked, it was gone. The radio cut to silence. Days passed. No one spoke of that night or of Margaret's vanishing. They buried the fear under chores, laughter, and daily routines. But the house never truly settled again. Some nights, the porch light flickered to life even when the switch was off. Some mornings, Eli's shoes appeared dusted with fresh soil. Even though he hadn't gone outside, the family began to avoid the backfield entirely. They planted flowers over the grave, hoping beauty might hide the truth. But the flowers never lasted long. Their stems turned black within days. Eli stopped sleeping through the night. His drawings changed. No more superheroes, no more Halloween pumpkins. Just rough, smudged sketches of a woman standing in a field, hands reaching out of the dirt. His mother found one drawing tucked under her pillow. On it, in shaky, childlike handwriting, were the words, "She's not angry anymore, just waiting." Autumn turned to winter, and for a while it seemed as though the land had finally gone quiet. Snow covered the grave, the trees stood bare, and the world softened, but the quiet was deceptive, the kind that only hides something deeper on the night of the first heavy snowfall. Eli woke again. He crept to the window, drawn by a faint sound, a heartbeat, low and steady, coming from the earth itself. He looked out across the white field, and there it was, that patch of dark soil, perfectly round, steaming faintly against the cold. The snow didn't touch it. It was breathing again. Weeks later, the family moved away. They left behind the house, the field, the grave, everything. But the new owners noticed strange things. The radio that turned on by itself. The child's drawings left in the attic, the way the ground at the back never froze completely. On Halloween night, the wind would sometimes carry a whisper, faint, female, mournful. If you listened closely, you could almost make out the words, "Don't forget me again." And just before dawn, when the world held its breath, the soil over the forgotten grave would shift once, ever so slightly, as if something below was still trying to rise. And every year, when the ground breathes again, a new family learns what the Carters tried to bury. The dead never stay silent when the living forgets.